Hello friends, happy August. My name is Hannah and I am here to wrap up my reading for July, which was pretty great. I had a really good reading month in June and I have continued to have a lovely time with my reading over the summer, which is just as well because the summer weather we have been having in the northeast of England, a little to be desired. So I have read 14 books this month, and weirdly, most of them have actually been hard copies. I tend to read not quite 50-50, but more audiobooks than I have this month. So I've really been feeling the physical copies. I'm gonna go through in the order that I finished them, which always means for Hannah Lost the Plot that I start with the books that I remember the least well. So bear with me, I will get better at remembering them. The first book I read this month was an audiobook. It was That Reminds Me by Derek Owusu, which was narrated by Cobner Holbrook Smith. This is a book that I was really interested in reading, partly because I thought that Derek Owusu's second book, which I also haven't read, might be in booker contention. The booker long list has come out this morning and it's not on there, but I wanted to read it anyway and I'm glad that I did. It was a kind of intriguing and potent little book, this one. It follows the main character Kay from sort of birth to death. It's kind of an entire life and it is not a very long book at all. Kay has quite a difficult upbringing. He's in social care before he's a year old, and then when he's a little bit older ends up kind of being placed back with his family, but he has this kind of fractious relationship with his family. He doesn't really feel like he belongs, and the book is told in this very kind of fragmented style. It's very vignette-y, and I did really like it. It felt very resonant and powerful when I was reading it. Even though the narrator did a brilliant job. He had a lovely voice, the narrator. But I almost wish I read like a hard copy or an ebook of it, because I wish I could have seen the words on the page, because it felt more poetical than more like poetry than prose at certain moments. And there was lots of imagery that I really liked. It's very much about trying to find a consolidated understanding of ourselves. Kay is a character who feels increasingly fractured and not whole, and like different versions of him need to operate in different areas. And I think the way the book was written really hammered that home. But having read it nearly a month ago, very little of it has actually stayed with me, and I wonder, I find that sometimes with audiobooks more than books that I have read in print. So we'll see. Here's Lewin to interrupt. Hi, you okay? Thanks. You gonna go lie down? Good boy. But yeah, it was, I did like it, and I do still want to pick up the that second book by Derek Owusu. Is it a second book? I think it's a second book. Yeah, it was ambitious to sort of do an entire life in such a short little book, and I respected it, even if what are you doing? He's eating something. Right, that was the first book. The second book that I read this month was my favourite book of the year so far, and this is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. Now, this is not a hot take to love this book. This is a pretty well loved book, and rightfully so, in my opinion. This is a sort of historical fiction novel that has two timelines. It follows a woman who wants to be the first person to do a pole-to-pole circumnavigation of the globe, like a pilot, who wants to fly around the world pole-to-pole. And it follows her from being a very young child all the way through to embarking on this flight. And then threaded through that is the story of a Hollywood actress who is going to play her in a film. And I don't know what it was about this book that I just found so utterly engrossing and compelling. And I know it's a cliche and trite to say I didn't want it to end, but I genuinely would have carried on reading this book forever. Her writing style is just really, really engaging, kind of poetical, but also with a real eye on storytelling and kind of pace and plotting. And I just thought it was, ace. I read this in a reading vlog, which I will link down below, where I was trying to hit as many prompts on that Billy Joel "We Didn't Start the Fire" reading challenge on Storygraph. I'll link the vlog down below in case none of what I just said makes any sense. But yeah, I thought this was so good, and it was a real example for me of how sometimes we don't get ourselves right. This was a book that I had seen. It was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction last year. I'd seen lots of people talk about it, and it just wasn't one of the ones on the list that I felt particularly drawn to or thought that I would particularly like. I don't really know what it was that put me off. I think maybe the cover. I don't know, just something about this book just I didn't think it was going to be a me book. And then I read it, and it's been my favorite book of the year so far. So like, sometimes we just really don't know ourselves. So yeah, that was great. And I think I've read some other great books this month, but I do think this is still my favorite book that I've read this month. So that was good, because the next book I read, I was a little disappointed in. This is Penance by Eliza Clarke. I didn't actually read this in a hard copy. I had a digital proof of it because it was a book that I was super, super, super excited about, because I loved Eliza Clarke's debut novel, Boy Parts. And this I was just a little underwhelmed by. This is a sort of, what Eliza Clarke is looking at here is really true crime and our relationship with true crime. It is a book within a book. So at the heart of this story is a horrific murder of a young teenage girl who was killed by 3 other teenage girls that she went to school with. But the majority of the book is a true crime book that another writer has written about this case. And so it opens with this kind of statement from the publisher saying that actually some of the people featured in the book have refuted the kind of way that this has been written, and the book itself has been quite controversial. The book within the book has been quite controversial. And it's funny because I went to the book launch of this. Eliza Clarke is a writer from the Northeast, which is why I particularly wanted to support her. That's where I live, if you're new here. And she was talking about, you know, how our relationship with true crime and what that is like, and how that can be problematic. And I agreed with everything she was saying, but for me, that the themes that she was talking about in the book weren't the things that came through for me in this. And I think what I loved so much about Boy Parts was her voice. And because this is a constructed book within a book, so it's not really written with her voice in it. And I just thought that was a real shame. So it didn't It didn't do it for me, but if you were on Tumblr in the noughties, man, has this book got so much content for you. Yeah, unfortunately not a favourite. If you want to know more about my thoughts on that, I will link a vlog down below where I read this and 2 other new releases, Carla by Colin Walsh and Open Throat by Henry Hoke, which were books I read last month, so they were in my June wrap up. But that was Penance. And then I read, okay, so there's a few books in this wrap up that I'm not going to go into too much detail on what I thought about them, because they are featuring in a vlog that will be coming up on my channel, where I got my best friend, Farmer, to choose my TBR for me from the unread books on my shelf. In case you have not been here before, I am on a bit of a mission to get my unread TBR, my physical TBR down, and part of what I've been doing is setting myself different like reading challenges as part of that goal. And this theme was letting my best friend choose my TBR. So she chose 7 books, which I've been reading over the last sort of 5 weeks or so. And I'm going to be vlogging that whole thing, and then we're going to sit down and do a kind of guessing each other's ranking of the 7 books, because we've both read them. So I don't want to give any spoilers. She said she's not going to be watching any of my content until we sit down and film it, but you know, just in case. So I won't be talking too much about these books, basically. But this was the first one that she picked, which was Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters. This is a kind of great domestic drama, really. It features the sort of complex relationships between 3 women. Well, a trans woman, a cisgendered woman, and a cisgendered man who previously lived as a trans woman and has now detransitioned, and is back to living as a man. Torrey Peters is a trans writer, and I think there were so many interesting things explored in this book about womanhood, about femininity, about the relationship between gender and parenthood. And I just thought it was, yeah, it was a really, really well done kind of character study. If you like a kind of messy relationship book, may I recommend. I thought this was very good. This was also longlisted for the Women's Prize a couple of years ago. So that is coming up. The next book I read is a backlist classic that I've been meaning to get to for ages. This is Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood. I read this in the same vlog that I read Great Circle for, so that we didn't start the challenge vlog. We didn't start the fire reading challenge vlog. Words. You may be familiar with this book. It is the source material for the musical Cabaret. And I really liked it, but it was quite surprising. I think if you've watched Cabaret and you knew that this was the source material, I was expecting this to have a little bit more of that debauched glamour that Cabaret has, but it's not really like that. This reminded me a lot of Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell. It's got that same sort of autofiction vibe. It is about Christopher Isherwood, the author, living in Berlin, and it's told in these series of chapters that kind of focus on different characters that he's encountering in Berlin in the sort of years between the 2 wars. So then in the background of the book, the Nazis are on the rise. They're in power, but Hitler isn't yet chancellor. And it's really, really interesting. It is not a book for people who need plot, because it really is, they are a kind of series of extended scenes. But it's really, really interesting to get a look at the kind of lives that people were living at that time in Berlin. And Christopher Isherwood obviously is an Englishman living in Berlin, so he's seeing it from a particular perspective, but you have these different kind of opinions. And when he was writing it, you know, at least writing the initial parts of it, you didn't yet know what the Nazis' endgame was, or what was going to happen with the kind of outcome of the war. So it has a real unsettling feeling. But yeah, not for plot fiends, but I really liked it. The next book is an audiobook that I listened to. It's The Bassrock by Evie Wyld, which was read by Julia Graham, Kirsty Strain, and Ross Anderson. I don't know what happened with this book, but I'm assuming user error. I don't know what happened. I should have loved this book. It's all the things that I really like, but I genuinely lost the plot with this book. I didn't get it. Which is a real shame, because I think I should have, and I can't quite put my finger on what didn't work, except maybe this was a book that I would have accessed better, not in an audio format, maybe. But let me tell you a little bit about it anyway, because it genuinely does sound really good, and I think it is. As I said, I think it was user error, but here we go. It is a split timeline book, so there is one timeline that's taking place in the kind of 1700s with this priest and his son, who were trying to get this witch or woman who's accused of witchcraft to safety, because she's her life is being threatened. And this all takes place in the same place. The Bassrock is the place where all of these things happen. So 1720s. Then you have this housewife post World War II. She's the second wife of a man, and essentially she's been married. He's married her because his first wife died and someone needs to raise the kids, right? So she's living this sort of slightly unfulfilling existence, and you've got a thread that's about her. And then you have a more modern day thread with a woman called Viv, who has suffered some kind of breakdown and is now sort of has the job of cataloguing her family's sort of belongings, and all of the families are sort of linked. But this is where I lost it, because I couldn't work out how they related to each other. I kept missing things. I kept not understanding who people were. Different characters were mashing into each other. And it's such a shame, because it had that kind of, I love a book that is a split timeline and you're looking at echoes of things through history. I love books that have kind of folkloric elements to it. I love books about unhinged women, and yet I couldn't make this book work for me, and I'm sad about it. But I will definitely read other things by Evie Wyld. I don't think it was anything in her writing style that wasn't working for me. I just, maybe right book, wrong time, possibly. I may pick it up again in a different format at some point, but equally, there are so many books to read. The next book I read was another Northeast author, actually. This is Speak of the Devil by Rose Wilding. This was the July pick for the queer book club that I am a part of up here in Newcastle. And this is a crime book that is just absolutely brimming with righteous female anger. Oh, there's so much rage in this book. It's marvellous. It begins with this really arresting scene. So there are seven women? Seven, yeah. So there's 7 women in this dusty, dank, littered room at the back of this pub in Newcastle, and one of them has brought the severed head of a man to this gathering. We know one of the 7 women has done this. We don't know which one of them has done it. And they all had motive to kill this man. This particular man, oh my God, like, only read this book if you're willing to allow your blood to be boiled by someone. Content warnings for everything, please do check them out. But it is essentially a whodunit of these 7 women, and you have all of their perspectives. You get some background into who they all are and how they were related to this head. And then you also have a female police officer who is maybe a little unethical in her approach sometimes, who is trying to solve it. So you kind of get both angles on it. I thought it was really really engrossing, really good fun, and like I said, it's kind of incredibly cathartic. So that was a good ride. And obviously I read it for a queer book club, but really good queer rep in here. So that was Speak of the Devil. Pausing for a beverage. The next book I read, I don't have a physical copy of here, because it was the one book on my TBR that Farmer picked that she hadn't read. So I finished it and she's now reading it so that we can do our rankings. But it was Cuddy by Benjamin Myers. This is the first Benjamin Myers book I've read. I have been meaning to get to him for a while because he is another author from the Northeast. And I really enjoyed this book. It was a very interesting, very challenging. I was hoping to see it on the Booker long list. It's a very bookery book, and I'm sad that it wasn't on there. But anyway, let me tell you what it is about. So it's sort of a reimagining or exploration of the life and legacy of St. Cuthbert, who is known in the Northeast affectionately as Cuddy. St. Cuthbert is the unofficial patron saint of the Northeast. He is also the reason that the city of Durham exists. So the book's really interesting because it has 4 main parts to it, each of which are hundreds of years apart in history. And Benjamin Myers employs a very different writing style and approach in each of those books that I think was fascinating. So the first book, for example, is written in verse, and then there's another section that's written in the second person. There's a section that's written kind of in a like Victorian epistolary, like diary style. So it's formally very, very interesting. I'm so sorry. I chugged some Coke and now I'm gassy. And yeah, each part's told really differently, and it was so interesting because it's exploring really the legacy. It's exploring legacy and community and our relationship with heritage and local history and all of the lives that have come before ours that have then informed who we are. And yeah, I was disappointed not to see it on the Booker long list. I won't lie. I thought that this would have had a good chance. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say for now, but there'll be a vlog coming up on my channel soon where I read that one and you can hear more about it then. The next book I read was Tamed by Alice Roberts. This is the only non-fiction title that I read this month. I've been really enjoying my fiction over the last couple of months actually, and I'm now wondering if maybe that's why I'm enjoying my reading more. Non-fiction's a funny one. I always feel like it's something like I should be reading, not necessarily something that I want to read. But that being said, I really enjoyed this book. It is sort of a history of, it's sort of a history of humans through 10 species that we have domesticated. Don't be sucked in by the fact that there's a dog on the cover of this. Dogs are one of the species, but it's not all about dogs. And it basically, every section she's got a different species, and she goes right back in time to explore what our relationship with that species has been like, how we have cultivated it, how we've used it, how we've changed it, but also how it has changed us and the advances that we've been able to make as a civilization because of our relationship with this other species. So they're not all like animals, there's also plants and things in there. And Lewin really scared him off. Yeah, and it's really interesting. It's kind of part archaeology, part anthropology, part kind of like genetic analysis, which sounds really scary, but Alice Roberts' writing style is so accessible. I am not a sciencey person. I really like and respect science. I wish I understood more about it, but I don't have a brain that works very well in a scientific capacity, and I followed this. So yeah, I will definitely be reading other things by her. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting. I think she was very even-handed. I think sometimes with books like this, it can be a bit depressing. It's like if you read a lot of the non-fiction that I've been reading recently has been kind of like about the climate and the world, and it can be quite depressing sometimes to just read things about how we as a species have just fucked everything up, whereas actually Alice Roberts has a slightly more appreciative, maybe a bit more of a positive outlook on things. Like, she's not shying away from the fact that there are some things that we have done wrong, absolutely, but also that actually there are some things that we have done in the shaping of this world that are actually pretty great. So yeah, that was Tamed by Alice Roberts. The next book was another one that I read for the vlog where Farmer chooses my TBR, and this was The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I always want to say The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Why are there so many Evelyns, and why do they come in sevens? So I read The Devil in the Dark Water, The Devil in the Deep Water by Stuart Turton a year or so ago for another book club. And I had a really fun time with it. It was a little camp and a little silly, but it was like a real romp. And that's kind of what I wanted from this one too, which is why I'd picked it up. And the premise of the book is so interesting, and I'm going to be unable to describe it in a succinct way, but essentially it's set in this manor house somewhere in the English countryside, and Evelyn Hardcastle is going to be murdered every night. The same day keeps happening over and over and over again until it is solved. And the protagonist who needs to solve the murder is put inside the body of a different person every day. So, 8 times, I think. So on the first day, he'll be in like this person's body and he'll experience where that person goes. And then the next day he'll be in someone else's body, but the same stuff will keep happening. Which is kind of like cool, but it's complex. And that sort of setup requires quite a lot of plot. Too much plot, probably, for this reader. He was very heavily, you can tell he's very heavily influenced by Agatha Christie. It is at its heart a whodunit. It's that classic you've got a finite number of suspects in an enclosed space, you know one of them did it, and you're working out who's done it, but with the added complication of body jumping and time looping. And if that sounds like it might be confusing, I was confused. The next book I read was actually a reread for me, and I reread this specifically because it was over the week of Newcastle Pride. This is a classic, I think pretty much a forgotten classic. No one I've spoken to has ever heard or read this book. It's I Will Not Serve by Evelyn Mahyere. It is a book that I picked up in my local library when I was a teenager, and I paid 10 pence for it from my library, and I absolutely loved it. It's a queer coming of age story about a young girl called Sylvie who has fallen in love with her teacher, who is a nun, and it's sort of about her struggle, not so much to accept her queerness, but to sort of work out who she is and what she wants to do. It's set in the 30s, 40s maybe, post-war, set in post-war France, and she doesn't want the sort of life that people think she should want, and it's really just about that. It's a thin little slip of a book. I read this for a vlog where I only read this book, and I was really nervous about picking it up again because I loved it so much when I was a teenager, and I haven't read it in a really long time, and I thought that it might not live up to the sort of nostalgic version of it I have in my head, but I did. I really enjoyed it. It's still one of my faves. I am determined to champion this book. I think it is out of print now. I think it's been out of print since the 80s. But I'm starting a one-woman campaign to get more people to read this book. So if it sounds good, I will link that vlog in the description box down below. Please watch it. Please try and find a second-hand copy of this book, and please talk about it because I wish more people had heard of it. That is I Will Not Serve by Evelyn Mahyere. The next book I read was an audiobook. It was The House of Names by Colm Toibin, which was read by Charlie Anson, Juliet Stevenson, and Pippa Nixon. This, I did that thing that I told myself I was going to stop doing, where you know, you ever just on like your like library app or like whatever app you use for audiobooks or whatever, and you just kind of just click on a book. Just, yeah, I'll just have that without knowing anything about it. So all I knew is that I wanted to read more Colm Toibin books. I've never read one of his novels before, but I've read extracts of his writing and really liked his writing style and wanted to read one of his books, and just got this because I happened to see it on BorrowBox and I went, oh yeah, great. And it's a Greek myth retelling, and it's specifically a Greek myth retelling of that period after the Trojan War, when Agamemnon returns home to his wife Clytemnestra. And I think if I'd known that it was that, I wouldn't have picked this book up at this point. I really like Greek mythology. It was one of the first sort of things I remember reading as a kid that I got really, really into. But I did binge a lot of Greek myth stuff last year and the first part of this year, and I have been giving myself a bit of a deliberate break from it, particularly this story, because there's so many retellings of the Trojan story. And I read Electra by Jennifer Saint earlier this year and felt like, oh, I just think I know this story a bit too well now. I think I need to give myself some distance. So I probably shouldn't have picked this up. That being said, this mostly focused on the character of Orestes, who is the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. Most of the Greek mythology, other than Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles, I think most Greek mythology retellings that I've read in recent years have had very overt female retellings kind of baked into them. It's a lot of, quite rightly, repositioning female characters that have been overlooked in kind of traditional tellings of the myth. So Orestes isn't actually a character that I had explored much of, because people tend to talk more about his mum, Clytemnestra, or his sister, Electra. And I liked this. He's got a great writing style. He writes sort of nebulous emotions really well, and yeah, so this is not going to be like a favorite book, but I'm definitely interested in reading some of his other writing. I think I'm Greek mythed out, but if you're not, this was a good one. I liked it. I preferred it significantly to Electra by Jennifer Saint. So if you, like me, like Greek myths, didn't particularly love that version by Jennifer Saint, then this may be one that you might want to pick up. Then we're on to the final two books, and again, both of these are in the upcoming vlog, so I won't be talking about them in too much detail, but they're both pretty well-known titles. So first up, we have The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. I loved Hamnet when I read it last year, by Maggie O'Farrell, and this is another historical fiction book. This is based on the life of Lucrezia de Medici, who was a young girl. She was the daughter of the Duke of Tuscany. This is set in the 1500s, and she was married off to this other Duke of Ferrara, and within a year of marriage, she was dead. It's the same story, I think it is. I went to a book talk that Maggie O'Farrell did for this book, where she was talking about the inspiration for the book was Robert Browning's poem, My Last Duchess. So if you're familiar with that poem, it's the kind of the same story. And the book opens with Lucrezia at dinner. God, struggling with my words now. At dinner with her husband, and she realizes that he intends to kill her. We don't really know at the outset how she's come to that conclusion or why she thinks that might be the case, but we believe her. And then we kind of have that, split timeline. I love me a split timeline. So we have then that direction of travel from the moment that she suspects he wants to kill her until things happen. But then we also go back in time and we understand more about her childhood, more about her parents and her family, and the early part of her courtship and betrothal and marriage to her husband. I thought it was really, really good. Maggie O'Farrell does these beautiful kind of textures. She's got a really like sumptuous writing style, which at parts I thought was got a little bit in the way of the pacing of the book, but on the whole, I think she's great, and I love the way she uses that timeline. I think it works really, really well. So that is The Marriage Portrait, and then last but not least, another one. I think this is quite a divisive little book. This is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which is a difficult book to describe, which you will know if you have read it or come across it before. But essentially, we are following a character called Piranesi. He lives in a world that is essentially an unending, massive house. Like, imagine like a big fancy country house, like a palace that just goes on forever, like unending hallways upon hallways upon hallways. And this is not a very heavily populated place where Piranesi lives. There is one other living human being, as far as he knows, who lives there, who he calls the Other. And there are some dead bodies, like some long dead bodies, some skeletons. And Piranesi spends his time cataloguing the contents of this world, walking the hallways. There's all these statues and stuff around, until another person arrives in the world and causes Piranesi to ask questions that he is not comfortable asking about where he is and who he is and why he's there. And I think that's all I can say without, it's such an easy book to spoil, but I thought it was very clever. I think Susanna Clarke is a very interesting writer. Again, I don't think this is a book if you're someone who wants to read something with a lot of plot. You kind of have to, I say this in the vlog, that you have to be very comfortable to enjoy this book. You have to be comfortable with being patient and being very just sort of open to not knowing what's going on. Like, you just kind of have to let it happen. Just let it happen in front of you and all will be well. At least that was my experience of it. So that was the last book that I read, and yeah, a really, really good reading month. I think I'm massively helped by the fact that Farmer picked so many of these books for me, and she knows my taste quite well. Obviously these were all books that I had on my shelf anyway, the ones that she picked for me, so she's not getting all the credit, but it was nice to be given a nudge to get to some of them finally, because a few of them have been sat on my shelf for quite a long time. And yeah, I would love to know what you have been reading this month. If you have had a good reading month, what's the best thing you've read this month? I am just about to start recording a vlog where I read some of the Booker long list. I don't know if I'm going to read the whole thing, but let me know your thoughts on the Booker long list in the comments down below if that's a prize that you follow and if you have opinions about that, because I'm interested in that book. Yeah, hello baby. I'm interested in that book list. And yeah, the next thing you see will probably be the vlog where I read these books. That's hopefully going to be up next week. And then the following week, maybe the ranking video of when Farmer and I do these. So you will see these books again soon on my channel. And yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, please do click the little like button, leave me a comment down below, subscribe to my channel if you fancy hearing more about these books and others, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.